I remember a time when CRPGs were a niche market, a rather impenetrable series of games that did not appeal to the average gamer because in order to fully enjoy the experience, the player was forced to work for it. And no one wants to spend their free time working, alright? Now, I was a console gamer my whole life, and when I was 16, I managed to get a job at a restaurant as a guy who takes dirty plates off of tables. Yeah, the pay was shit, but it was enough to buy my first computer. An AMD K6533. It was pretty fucking super speed back then. I could run Quake, Diablo, and Doom, and Quake. When Final Fantasy VII came out, I remember being all excited over it. I mean, I finished the game in a marathon session over the span of 3 days, and all I could talk about was how super cool the characters were, telling my computer gaming friend how much he was missing by not owning a PlayStation. Well, it ended up coming out for PC later on, and he played it, and you know what he told me? It was shit. Yeah, I was crushed. Surely he didn't like RPGs, but no, I was wrong. He handed me a disc called Fallout, and the rest, as they say, I guess, is history. Now, fast forward to 2016, and Fallout 4 is released. To much acclaim and hand-wringing, but here we are in November, and I have yet to finish the game after several new game starts and pledges that I will finish this fucking game this time, I swear it, you'll see, this is the last time, goddammit! So I know what you're gonna say. Fallout 4 has less than Fallout 1 in terms of RPG elements, so how is less more if you think Fallout 4 is the inferior game? Well, count this as the first in a series of times your assumptions are wrong as I tell you how Skyrim made more into less. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with Morrowind because it's the game I remember the most. Now, what are some of the things Morrowind has done well? Well, first is player choice. Now, unlike some RPGs like Fallout, the Elder Scrolls series hasn't been too big on choice in the way that you interact with quests. At least not in any meaningful way. In fact, morality in an Elder Scrolls game is very black and white. It's a binary choice of dubious good or bad moral choices, whereas earlier Fallout games tended to have several choices to fix a problem. And not all of them can be placed on the side of good or bad, but since both factions of a quest have their reasons for wanting something done. And it isn't always clear who you should side with because both sides have their good points, which keeps the master, for example, being more than a two-dimensional monster.
I don't think that I can continue to have done the things I have done in the name of progress and healing.
And Dagoth Erd is just some dude who is ruining the world because reasons. I don't know, he's mad. Where Morrowind handled choice was actually in the factions. See, you could choose which faction you wanted to side with, and depending on the faction you're standing, would go down with other people of the opposing factions. In order to finish certain missions then, you would have to bribe or persuade the people of the opposing faction to get them to talk to you. It added a layer of depth and choice to the player, where without this system in a game like Skyrim, you can cheerfully go about your day doing every quest for any faction and no one cares. You would think a faction like the Companions might object to you being a part of the Dark Brotherhood murdering people, or even the Thieves Guild who detest murdering people. But the thing is, you never murder people that didn't deserve it and who weren't objectively bad anyway, so there's really not even the option of doing the naughty thing in Skyrim. And I've heard people call the system in Morrowind shallow, that having to bribe a person to get them to like you is a simple thing and shouldn't even be in there because it didn't add anything. Now, I don't know how anyone can come to this conclusion. I mean, simple math solves this problem easy. 1 minus 1 equals 0. You cannot add depth to a system by taking depth out. You replace the equation with a plus sign, 1 plus 1 equals 2, and then you start to get the point. You have to replace the system with something that is more in depth, but this isn't even the worst thing about taking out this feature. Now see, in Oblivion they added a persuasion wheel, and that persuasion wheel was actually quite a bit more shallow in that it turned the act of making someone like you into a sort of mini-game. that takes what little meaningful interaction with NPCs was in the game out of the game. Now, a better way to do this would have been to improve the system that was in place instead of removing it entirely in Skyrim. I mean, the way a game like Fallout handles this is that your choices are your choices. Once you make them, they are made, and you will suffer the consequences or be forced to reload a save. You know, the decision was made to the console gamer, okay? It is admittedly a pain in the ass to have to reload a game in a console, but a gamer playing a game the way it is meant to be designed is considered something only hardcore gamers do. So seeing something like this removed is seen as streamlining, whereas what it actually is the market appeasing and expanding their audience, right? So to conclude this part of my argument, meaningful faction choice was thrown out the window in order to allow the player to participate in more content in a single playthrough, which actually ended up resulting in less overall content. And according to the level editor, there's somewhere over 500 quests in Morrowind. Skyrim, by comparison, has about 244. I don't have to tell you which number is lower. So what do I attribute that to? More ends up being less, and it's in the following way. So let's lay these comparisons between Morrowind and Skyrim piece by piece in terms of time and financial cost in development, as this determines quite heavily the kind of content you will get. Here we go. Alright, so let's start with the Morrowind quest dialogue system. Now, Morrowind had a deceptively complex and deep conversation system that was akin to older point-and-click adventure games in that you collected keywords, but didn't necessarily have a choice. So most of the time in how you responded, right? So you were limited to asking questions about keywords, and almost every NPC would tell you the same thing. However, some NPCs would actually be able to elaborate, and you may uncover through this dialogue another rare keyword, which would then open up the game even more. Dialogue became a puzzle to solve. This had the benefit of allowing the writer to write dialogue only twice for each keyword, and apply that across the board to all factions and random NPCs. You know, it was a much more efficient from a game design standpoint and time-saving method that had the extra added benefit of making the world and its lore so much more rich, because that was where the writer was allowed to focus their time. It also had the downside of course, making all the NPCs seem the same, making most interactions with NPCs feel meaningless. Now, Skyrim, on the other hand, the dialogue had branches to give the player this illusion that they were able to roleplay a character, when the options were simply tell me more, yes I'll do the quest, and no I'll do your quest later. Now the problem is that this is a much more intense, from a writing standpoint, system, because you not only have to write unique dialogue for the NPCs, but you also have to write unique responses for the player. Now, compounding this, you also have to have every single dialogue line voiced, and you have to have an actor come in and voice each line, so you gotta pay them, right? So the quality of the voice acting also suffers because, well, there's so much dialogue, you know? There's so much of it.
Help the Dark Elves. Oh, you must have heard me talking to Malfear. The Dark Elves.
They have to rush the actor through the lines in order to get them to make a quick delivery. So what you'll see in a lot of these games is the lines are delivered with this almost affectless monotone, because the actors were not properly able to prepare each line.
I heard that thieves broke into the Arcane University, the Imperial Legion compound, and the temple all on the same night. Wait a minute, let me do that one again.
More is less, see? This is how this works. You know, the downside to this is that you get less interactable NPCs with meaningful dialogue, less overall NPCs, and dialogue choices that are limited, because to do more complex dialogue options would mean you would have to pay someone to voice those lines, or gasp, make the player read. Now, I know what you're asking yourself, you know, why is a voice actor that bad? I mean, I like shooters, so why should I care about meaningful dialogue when I'm going to skip it anyway? Well, aside from the reasons I already laid out already, hearing someone speak is a passive action on the part of the player. Now, I'm going to get a little technical here. Just bear with me. The brain becomes disengaged, like when you watch television or sit on the couch and listen to the radio. Having a voice actor tell you the story in a video game, is just like that. It's the same reason why I have a hard time remembering the plot of any Call of Duty game or the names of any of their characters. And lots of studies have been done to show the link and the rise in popularity of television and television programs to a link in a lower IQ, right? But even more fascinating studies have been done showing which parts of the brain light up when watching TV and which ones light up when they're reading. But what I have found personally is that I absorb so much less of what is going on in the story when I am listening to someone talk as opposed to when I am reading. So when I read, it is in my own voice. The inflection is my own, and the attitude in which I interpret the way something is said is informed by my experience. I connect to the material in a much deeper and more profound way than when I hear a bored voice actor reflect, dialogue or on one take in a monotone, passionless way. This is also the problem with having thousands of lines of dialogue to voice and having the actor do one take with each line. Now compare the voice actors on Fallout 1 to the voice actors in Fallout 3 and you'll see what I mean.
Rest of the hubber's been picking on me like a bad booger since I came back to town. I can't leave, though. When the deals are done, it's still my home.
They listen when I talk, but they don't hear. You know what I mean?
You're getting more out of Skyrim with fully voiced actors, giving you details on quests and all of these dialogue choices, but in reality you're getting less depth and less immersion, and you're not actually getting what you think you're getting because you're not even able to roleplay. So, more is less. Now, let's talk about Morrowind quest details. When you get a quest in Morrowind, it was sometimes to a place that wasn't clearly marked on the map. I mean, it's rarely ever marked on the map because there were no, little arrows floating around everywhere. But part of the experience in Morrowind was finding out where a place was. In fact, some of the missions were structured in a way that you would need to speak with NPCs in order to find a possible location of an item you were looking for. And then sometimes when you went to that place, you would find out that the item isn't even there, and you would have to go somewhere else. Sometimes the NPC you needed to talk to would hate you because of your faction and wouldn't even talk to you. So not only did you need to find them, but you also had to convince them to help you. This is why the persuasion system added subtle depth to almost every quest. Sometimes a quest would have you go into a dungeon, and if you didn't read the directions that the NPC gave you to the place, you would find yourself rummaging through your journal to find out where a place was located. This made you actually pay attention to the dialogue, and as a side effect, lodge the details of the mission into your brain. Sometimes it would be quite difficult to find a place, but that was part of the exploration. Now, finding the mission area was part of the puzzle that needed to be solved, as opposed to hunting for the arrow. Well, that sounds like more is more, you might be saying. Actually, no, it isn't. For this system, you don't need a waypoint to a place, which means less programming, less testing, and less manual placing of waypoint markers, which means less continuity checks on the part of quality assurance. You also can design your dungeons any way you want without regard to confusing the player who is hunting for a waypoint you put into the game. Now, Skyrim, on the other hand, when you get a quest in Skyrim, the first thing most of us do is check the map. Now, I know that when I played the game, most quests felt like, hey, I need this thing at this place, go and fetch it for me. And after a few of these quests, the locations became amorphous, the details muddy. I found myself breezing through the dialogue, collecting quests like Pokemon, and getting to them whenever the mood struck me. And nothing was urgent, no matter how the character pleaded that it was. I just didn't feel the urgency. And this is a symptom of the puzzle-like structure of Morrowind being replaced by a more cinematic and heavily scripted, story-driven quest base being added to the game, but also to the fact that I didn't need to keep anything in my short-term memory. No directions to memorize, no puzzle to solve, no details to forget. Just go here, do this really simple thing, come back, simple. The quest in structure and design became more simple. For instance, what little puzzles are available are boiled down to hunting for a switch, and the hunting part is even taken out because there is quite literally a glowing white arrow pointing you to the thing you need to get. So while we get more varied and heavily scripted mission bases like the Daedric quests and some of the companion quests where you and your companion turn into werewolves and hunt down the hunters, you get less quests and less complex quests in terms of structure, with puzzles getting tossed out the window completely because there is nothing to puzzle out when the game is quite literally telling you how to finish the quest. Once again, more is less. Factions in Morrowind were dense and had their own lore, and certain factions were opposed to certain other factions, so it became a sort of juggling act when you wanted to do a quest for more than one opposing faction, but needed to do a sort of back and forth in order to keep from losing too much fame in one and being locked out of another. Now, this played very well with the persuasion system, with you being able to get yourself out of a hole through manipulation or bribing. There were also special factions that allowed you to change the way your character played, like the vampires. Now, when you became a vampire in Morrowind, it was a pretty big deal. I mean, people treated you differently, including most that would just downright not even talk to you. You know, there were also clans of vampires, and depending on which clan turned you, would attack you on sight. So factions were deep and had their own economics and hatreds. You know, there was much more to joining a guild than just what factions you were given. Now, Skyrim, on the other hand, werewolves are reviled in Elder Scrolls lore, okay? And so are vampires. And as they should be, you know, because a werewolf is, by its very definition, an inhuman beast bent on killing. Now, people fear this sort of monster, but not in Skyrim. See, if people reacted to you the way they did in Morrowind, it may lock you out of doing certain quests. So in an effort to allow the player to experience as much content as they can, joining a faction, becoming a werewolf or vampire ends up meaning nothing. Not only is this watering down of a mechanic, but it is also dreadfully lazy and just another way that in effort of giving you more, you actually get less. How is it that I can join the Dark Brotherhood, a faction reviled and feared, and be still part of the Thieves Guild? I mean, a guild that values stealth over violence and reviles murder, because you wouldn't be able to experience both if you join one over the other, and that would require you, the player, to do another playthrough, right? And that's inconvenient. And see, that's where this game fails to deliver more. See, it is trying to give you more quests, more options, more freedom to do whatever you want. But in doing that, they've actually watered down the game and have, in effect, giving you less of an experience, less of a tailored experience based on your decisions. Now, let's talk about Morrowind's graphics. Man, them fucking character models. I mean, am I right? I mean, look at those faces. Look at them! That's a face only a mother can love. But also, look at those animations. What kind of jump is that? Who jumps like that? But man, look at those environments. Look at how densely packed they are. Look at the detail and design. Look at the layout. Could it be that scaling down on the detail of characters and armor was the benefit of the things you could see more often, like the environment? I mean, I remember the layout of Vivek and Balmora better than any city in any game I have ever played. And it has something to do with the game not holding my hand, not putting white arrow markers all over things, and actually letting me pay attention to what's in the environment, and making me look around the city for the building that I need to be in. Now, I've played Morrowind over 200 hours, and there are still things I haven't seen in Vivek. The graphics of NPC models are simple, but look at the amount of armor you can wear. So many different types and pieces. I mean, it's the most amount of pieces of armor you can wear in this series after Hammerfall. I mean, Morrowind had the most, and then ever since then, it was slowly getting taken away to where the level of what we have now is basically hardly anything. You know, that was because the armor was easy to model, easy to unwrap, and the texture sizes were small enough to texture relatively quickly. You couldn't do that many varieties when you have to worry about each piece needing a diffusion map, a spec map, a reflection map, an ambient occlusion map, a normal map, a high poly model, and a low poly model. Jesus. The less graphical detail equals more options for the player. Now, Skyrim's graphics, on the other hand, I'd be lying if I didn't admit that Skyrim's graphics are pretty impressive. I mean, they fucking are. You know, for the first time in forever, we have human faces in an Elder Scrolls game, okay? You know, something that doesn't look like a cross between a fat child and a fucking booberry. It's high detail, high poly count models with all the state-of-the-art graphics you can want. I mean, sure, it wasn't the best looking title to come out that year, but it was way more acceptable for the kind of game it was. I mean, let's face it, as RPG fans, we have come to expect subpar graphics in our games, okay? And that right there proves my point. With better graphics comes less content. If there is anything in this industry that affects the quality of gameplay and writing, it is graphics. Let me break down how long it takes to make a character model. Okay, I'll be excluding concept art here, which is a cost in and of itself, but it's not applicable here, right? So a high poly character model, it can take anywhere from like 30 to 50 hours depending on the complexity of the model. That's more than a week's worth of work, okay? And this is a very generous estimation. Because a high poly character model, man, that can take 2 or 3 weeks sometimes, depending on the complexity. But we're just gonna go ahead and say these guys are professionals. They're not like me. It doesn't take them forever to fuck around in ZBrush. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt, right? So 50 hours, right? Now, a low poly model can take anywhere from, let's see, 8 hours to another week. I mean, depending on your workflow. I mean, if you're able to make your high poly cage, or your low poly cage, I should say, from your high poly cage, then it won't take you much time at all. But it really depends on your, your workflow. Now, the fusion textures, flat shaded, right? Which means no shadows baked in and none of that, right? Just flat shaded texture. Okay? For me, it can take me anywhere from 2 hours to 8 hours, depending on what I'm actually working on, right? But I'm not a terribly skilled texture artist. You could probably half that for most people. Specular texture, this can take anywhere from 2 hours if the diffusion can be used as a base for it. So the specular is what gives the highlights, right, on a character model. So this can take anywhere from like 2 to 4 hours, depending, on what your workflow is, right? A normal map, depending on workflow, can take no time at all, or it could take about 16 hours if you have to fix the texture and everything. Unwrapping a low poly model, I mean, I've had this take an entire day before. Depending on the complexity, it can take a long freaking time. But with pelt mapping tools, it can probably be around a 4, maybe 8 hour process. Now, I don't currently work in 3D anymore, so if there are some current experts out there doing this more professionally, please feel free to correct me below. I mean, I would actually be interested to know. But if these estimates are correct, it takes roughly 60 hours of work to complete one model of moderate complexity. Not to mention how long it takes to rig and animate. I mean, then each piece of armor needs to be mounted to dummy nodes and ensured that it animates correctly on the model. And you can add another 60 hours or so for the animation and rigging portion for each unique rig that is needed. And we're not even going to be talking about facial animations. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Some of this stuff is very difficult shit, man. So the better the graphics, the longer it takes, which means the more it costs, right? So, which it also means, as a result, the less options you the player get, because it would drive the price of the product up to model everything. Not to mention the fact that when you advertise now, you are basically required to have a high quality render, which costs render farm time and an immense time in detail modeling, because the advertising footage must look better than the already stellar graphics, right? Thus, quite a lot of your budget gets diverted to material that isn't even in the fucking game. So better graphics equals less options, therefore, say it with me, more is less. Alright, so I'm going to wrap this up before this ends up being a 2-hour video. So to conclude this, the more you ask for, the less you get, especially when the focus is on streamlining systems and beautification. And the unfortunate thing is that in order for a blockbuster title to be considered successful anymore, more work must go into the things that water down complexity and cover up jagged edges. Because in order to make money with a bloated budget, you must appeal to the mass market. And to appeal to a mass market, you must cut away anything that is considered frustrating or immersion breaking or even remotely tedious. My argument here is that while the experience is much more streamlined and has a better flow, that doesn't make it a better game. A game is much more than something you play through to get to the end. It is a bundle of experiences that are at times unpredictable and give you outcomes you may not expect, and in an effort to hold your hand and guide you by the nose through the experience that the developers want you to experience, they have taken away agency from the player and left them with an inferior, albeit pretty and fun experience. So I just want to say that I don't dislike Skyrim. Actually, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I mean, I didn't play it as much as Morrowind, but that's because, you know, the experience is a much easier experience, so you can pretty much breeze through the content pretty quickly. I just had a problem with it being considered an RPG when there literally were no RPG elements in this game. Maybe I'll go into another video and talk about the lack of RPG and the people who call a game an RPG just because it has some elements from an RPG. But not in this video. So to go ahead and wrap this all up, as I said, less is more. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but it's something I think that designers and developers should consider. When I look at the indie game market, I see a lot of potential, and I see a lot of people taking this less is more approach, focusing experiences down to 1 or 2 core gameplay loops. And that's really refreshing because it allows the player to experience the game, but also to master the few tools that they have and use them in unique and funny ways. Alright guys, so that's the end of this video. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe. Please give me one of them thumbs up, comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you would like the next video to be. And until next time, this is Strat-Edgy. Peace out.